Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is a solo Q&A. I put up a question box on Instagram, and I also collected some questions that came up during some recent check-ins with my clients. Just to let you know, I ended up recording by myself for over 40 minutes, so I decided to split this podcast episode into two parts. In this first part, I'm going to answer all of the training-related questions, and then in part number 2, which will be out very soon, I will be covering all of the nutrition-related questions. And with that, let's roll into the training-related questions. The first question came from Instagram, and it says, tips to progress when incrementing weight is too much. Can curl 20 plus reps with 10, but can't get the 12.5s up. So this is very common, and in fact, I actually made a post on Instagram about what's called micro-loading a few weeks ago. Using the biceps curl as our practical example here, my recommendation would be to get yourself a pair or several pairs of wrist and ankle weights so that you can use them to micro load, to essentially add a very tiny amount of load that helps you avoid having to do 20 plus reps with the 10s, but also creates a transition point, a transition load between the 10s and the 12.5s if you're struggling with the 12.5s. These ankle and wrist weights are easily available on Amazon. They usually come in several different loading options, from 0.5 of a pound or even 0.25 of a pound all the way up to several pounds, or vice versa, kilograms as well. I have them and I use them regularly, and they also come in different loading options depending on your preferences. For example, some have a fixed weight, whereas others are comprised of different little sandbags so that you can add some of the sandbags or remove them and therefore change the total load. They are essentially like adjustable dumbbells. Regardless of the option that you choose, these are really, really helpful to wear around your wrists or around your ankles if you're doing an exercise like a leg raise, in order to add weights and microload if the weights at your gym have excessively large increments. Another option, if you can do 20 plus reps with this weight that you're using, the 10s, is to, I know that you, question asker, have a coach right now, so you can ask your coach to replace your straight sets with metabolite techniques, because if you can do so many reps, metabolite techniques can really help stimulate your muscles in a way that straight sets don't do, since metabolite techniques generate a lot of metabolic stress, which can be generated with straight sets as well, but then you would have to do 20 plus reps with relatively short rest intervals, whereas with metabolite techniques, you can concentrate a lot of work within a shorter period of time. For example, you can do a drop set whereby you go to failure, so you do your first 20 plus rep sets, you don't wait, you go immediately into the next set, you drop the weight. So for example, if you started with the 10s, you drop to the 8s, and you do as many reps as you can to your target RPE or to failure, depending on your programming. And then if you have yet another drop, you drop the weight again, and you keep going until you've completed all of your drops. This is more time efficient. It stimulates metabolic stress to a large degree, which seems to be positively associated with hypertrophy, even though we don't really know quite yet how or why, to my knowledge. In any case, it can stimulate metabolic stress, and it also helps avoid having to do 2, 3, 4 sets of 20 plus reps, which can be a real grind, to be honest, because, as I've just said, drop sets tend to be much shorter. Because after your initial set of 20 plus reps, even if you drop the weight, since you are not resting between the drops, you are unlikely to be able to do 20 plus reps every time you drop the weight. You might find that you're doing 20 plus reps, then you have a drop, you do maybe 10 to 15, you have another drop, you might only do 5 to 10. So it feels less like a grind, and it doesn't last as long, even though it burns. Don't get me wrong, which is a feature of metabolic stress. It comes with that burning sensation in your muscles. But it is quite fun. It's the fun kind of pain from my perspective. So thank you for that question, and hopefully that helps. The next question is another training related question from Instagram, and it says, how to progress lower body movements when upper body strength limits. And in brackets, it gives an example. It says goblet squats. So I'm going to refer to the goblet squats specifically because this is a very common issue that I found with my clients, particularly those who train at home, where lower body movements are a little bit limited because of limited equipment. So goblet squats are a common go-to, at least in my programming. So first and foremost, make sure that your setup preserves your energy for the actual set. If you are heaving the weight off of the floor to get into position, you are going to waste a lot of energy doing that. So my suggestion is lift the weight off the floor, set it up on a bench, then squat down in front of the bench as close to the dumbbell as you can. Place the dumbbell under your chin in the goblet squat position and squat the weight up. This saves you a lot of upper body energy and strength that then you can use to last longer before your back starts collapsing forward. That is the common problem when your upper body strength is the limit. Once you are in the right position, you want to make sure that you are bracing and you know how to perform the Valsalva maneuver correctly, which aids with bracing. Because another reason why you might be collapsing forward might not be necessarily only your upper body strength, but it could be also that you're not bracing properly. So if you're not generating tension throughout your core to maintain a stable upright position, you are going to lean forward and collapse, as I've said, during the squat. Another suggestion is to change your squat variation. Instead of placing the dumbbell under your chin, you could use 2 separate dumbbells so that each one weighs less to make up the amount of weight that you're going to use, and rest one end of each dumbbell on each shoulder. So it's a bit difficult to visualize because this isn't a YouTube video, it's a podcast, but hopefully it makes sense. So you would be holding your dumbbells like you're trying to do a shoulder press, but you're not pressing upwards, of course. You're just resting the dumbbells on your shoulders and you would perform the squat. While it does change the biomechanics of the exercise slightly because the placement of your weight leads to a different type of stimulus due to physics. I'm not going to go into that right now because it is quite technical and it's not necessary for you to understand my answer. But there is a slight change in the way that your body will perceive that load if you move from 1 dumbbell to 2 dumbbells and you rest them on your shoulders rather than under your chin. However, for all intents and purposes, if you are still maintaining an upright torso, and you are aiming to get the back of your upper leg, so your hamstrings, as close as you possibly can to your shins in the hole or the bottom of the squat, then it is still going to be a very quad dominant exercise. And I'm assuming that it is your goal for it to be quad dominant, only because I normally program goblet squats with a goal of aiding quad hypertrophy rather than emphasizing the glutes. Just in case you're not aware, squat variations tend to work both the glutes and the quads. However, you can change the extent to which you're focusing on one or the other muscle group by changing your technique. To wrap up my answer on this question, if all of these suggestions don't help, then you have to consider what your priority is. And I have different alternatives for different goals. If your goal is specifically performance on the goblet squats, then you want to focus in the rest of your program on strengthening your back as a whole and the upper back and the erectors in particular, and also strengthen your core and learn to brace properly. If you do all of this over time, this will lead to you being able to maintain an upright torso during doing this exercise so that you will be able to train your quads without the rest of your body being the limiting factor. On the other hand, if your main goal is hypertrophy, then I would simply suggest to change this exercise to another exercise that you can perform without any other muscle group being the limiting factor, because you can still focus on strengthening the back and the core, and then eventually you'll be able to use this exercise to stimulate hypertrophy in the quads, but it is going to take time. So if you want the quickest route to quad hypertrophy gains, then I would recommend changing the exercise to a variation where you can keep your torso upright and you can fully stimulate the quads and make them the limiting factor of every set. Examples that come to mind: I am assuming that you are performing a goblet squat because maybe you're in the early stages of training specifically for hypertrophy or even resistance training in general, since the goblet squat is a really great variation for people who are more on the beginner side of the experience spectrum. So if that is the case, another exercise that could be helpful to learn proper technique in a safe manner would be a type of Smith machine squat variation or the leg press machine. Depending on what you have available in your gym and your level of experience and confidence, you could use the horizontal machine that's usually pin loaded, or you could use a 45-degree leg press that's usually plate loaded. On the other hand, if the issue is that you have limited equipment, maybe you only have dumbbells and resistance bands because you're training at home, then another helpful variation would be if you can Google this and or find it on YouTube. It's called a wall hack squat, and it looks like you are resting your back against a wall or a door. Importantly, you need to be able to slide up and down, and it can be helpful to wrap a towel around your shoulders like a cape. Then you're holding the dumbbell in a goblet squat position, and you are sliding down on along the wall or the door into a squatting position, and then you are pushing yourself back up. This takes out the issue of the upper back collapsing forward, and it mimics a hack squat machine at the gym, so it can actually be very stimulative for the quads. Now, I am pretty confident you didn't expect me to go on so long discussing this particular question, but hopefully I've given you plenty of food for thought. Now, the last training-related question I have for today says, I'm struggling to build mind-muscle connection with my pecs. This question is really interesting to me personally because for a long time I struggled with my pec mind-muscle connection, and it took me years of practice to really learn to feel my pecs when I was training. So hopefully I can provide some insight into how to achieve this. First, when it comes to mind-muscle connection in general, What's really helpful is to understand the origin and the insertion of the muscle that you want to develop a better mind muscle connection with. The origin, as the name suggests, is the point from which the muscle starts, and this is closest to the midline of the body, whereas the insertion is the point where the muscle, in quotes, ends, attaches onto the bone that's further away from the midline of the body than the origin is. And muscles can have more than one origin and more than one insertion point. Once you understand the origin and the insertion, you are also more equipped to understand the movement that this muscle performs. And when you understand that movement, that is what you want to focus on when you are performing any exercise that targets said muscle. So when it comes to the pectoralis major, commonly known as the pecs, the pectoralis major is actually divided into different regions or divisions. And these are essentially groups of pec fibers that have different origins. And these origins include the clavicle, the sternum, and the ribs. And they all insert onto the humerus, so the bone in the upper arm. Since this isn't a YouTube video, so it's a little bit complicated to visualize this perhaps, I highly recommend that you listen to this part with an image of the pectoralis major pulled up on Google in front of you so that this is as clear as it can be. So now that you understand the origin and the insertion of the pecs, you can better understand what movement they perform. The main actions performed by the pectoralis major, by the pecs, are called horizontal flexion, adduction, and internal rotation of the humerus. These are technical terms that essentially refer to the movement of the upper arm during a bench press. So forget about the forearm and the hand because the pecs do not attach onto those body parts. The pecs only move the upper arm. You also move the forearm and the hand as a result of the movement coming from the upper arm. So focus solely on the upper arm. Think about the upper arm rotating forward as you're pressing the weight in front of you during a bench press. That is what the pecs do, and they do it because they are attached onto the humerus, okay? So they pull the humerus around the rib cage and forward. Now we are going to focus on this particular action during your warm-up and during your working sets. So start with a body weight warm-up. You can do this sitting or standing up. You don't need to be lying, but you can do it lying as well. You want to put your hands on your pecs in the spot between the pec and the shoulder or the upper arm, just above the armpit, which is a strip of pec fibers that lead to the insertion point of this muscle. So hopefully this makes sense. So put your hand there and now move the other arm, mimicking a bench press. So move it backwards and forwards, pressing and rotating the arm in front of the body. And pay attention to how you will feel under your hands your muscle squeezing or contracting and then relaxing as you move your arm backwards again. And that's it. That's essentially mind-muscle connection. Your mind is focused on the action that the muscle is performing and you are feeling the muscle moving. Excellent. Now we are going to apply this same focus when you're using some weight. So you're going to move into your warm-up sets for the bench press. Let's keep using this as an example. Now you are not touching the muscle anymore because you're using both dumbbells. So you need to focus your mind and remember the sensation that you were feeling when you were touching the muscle and maintain that focus onto that area of the body. And you are going to repeat the exact same process when you move into your working sets. Now, don't expect that this will change your mind muscle connection overnight. If you've been struggling to feel a certain muscle for a certain period of time, it will take some time for you to get better at it. There are muscles with which we have a naturally really good mind muscle connection. We literally do an exercise and we feel that muscle straight away. If that's not the case with other muscles, we need to build up to that. And it can take weeks, it can take months, it can even take years. So don't get disheartened and be patient. Other ways to improve upon your mind muscle connection with the pecs is to make sure that you are biasing them as much as possible with your exercise selection and your exercise order. So starting with the exercise order, if you know that you struggle with the pecs, then potentially perform your isolation exercises for the pecs, like your dumbbell or cable flies, at the beginning of your pec targeting workouts before you move into the compound lifts, like the presses or the push-ups. The reason for this is that a compound or multi-joint lift is going to train multiple joints and therefore multiple muscle groups at once. And generally, because they are more technical than isolation lifts, they are often programmed at the beginning of a workout. However, because they train different muscles, you can inadvertently bias them towards a muscle that you don't intend on training, because maybe it's a muscle you have a better mind muscle connection with to begin with, or maybe because that muscle is stronger than your pecs. For example, if you're doing a bench press, you might feel it more in your shoulders and in your triceps than in your pecs. And this might be because your technique is biasing, even without you wanting it to. It's biasing the triceps or the shoulders because perhaps your pecs are weaker than either of these two, or because simply you have a better mind muscle connection with the triceps or the shoulders. So if you place your isolation lifts for the pecs at the beginning of that workout, you are going to fatigue the pecs first, and you will potentially get a pump even. So at that point, you are feeling them after the isolation lifts. And when you go into your compound lifts, these are going to be more likely, the pecs that is, are going to be more likely to be the limiting factor. And with regards to exercise selection, as I've just said, compound lifts by their nature can be used to bias more a muscle over another because they involved multiple muscles at once. Just like I said when I was talking about the goblet squats, you can perform different squat variations, or you can use a different technique for the same squat variation to make it more quad dominant or to make it more glute dominant. So whatever exercise you are doing for your pecs, make sure that you learn the appropriate technique to bias the pecs over the other muscle groups. As an example, if you are doing a dumbbell bench press, you want to line up your elbows with your nipples, or your pecs if you have had top surgery and you didn't keep your nipples, so that you make sure that when you're pressing, you are not lifting up the elbows to a point where they're parallel with the shoulders, because in my experience, that tends to recruit the front delts a little bit more, and so you will feel the exercise more in the shoulders than in the pecs. You may also want to use a lower or flat incline over a higher incline, because the higher the incline, the more you are going to bias your shoulders. And you might want to ensure that you use a moderately wide grip, because if you, the closer to your sides you bring your elbows, the more likely you are going to feel the press in the triceps. So these are all some suggestions to think about when you're considering your form, but the basic principle is that you want to make sure that the form you use on each exercise is biasing the muscle that you want to develop a better mind muscle connection with. Thanks again for yet another very interesting question. And that's a wrap for part one of this Q&A episode. Thank you very much for tuning in, as always. And if you'd like to start working with me, then you can apply via the link in the show notes, or you can reach out to me on Instagram at nikias_fit2transform, or via email at fit2transform@gmail.com. However you choose to connect with me, I look forward to hearing from you. I really appreciate your time, and until the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.